One of the things about a meme that is successful, I've found, is that the originator of the meme loses control of it.
I had no idea that stupid joke would turn into such a cult phenomenon.
When the general public thinks about general intelligence or AGI, I mean, they always see Cameron's Terminator, right?
We seem to have a long tradition of sci-fi movies that are pretty anti-AI. Describing various forms of hell is like, it's fun, like it's Dante's Inferno. But there's no like Dante's Heaven, right? No one would read it. Evolution had no idea how human intelligence works, but it built it anyway. I think the world works better when everyone has a feeling of abundance or better tomorrow. We need technological progress. It's a necessity. It's the only thing that makes our civilization prosper.
Well, hello, everyone. It's Jim O'Shaughnessy with yet another Infinite Loops. I have been waiting for this one for quite some time. Roon, who is one of my favorite accounts on Twitter, who is an AI expert, an engineer, and a techno-optimist like me, is joining me as my guest. Thank you so much for coming on.
Pleasure to be here, Jim.
So the first question I've got to ask is, did you plan on sort of taking Twitter by storm and getting to be the birther of the wordcel shape rotator dichotomy?
No, I had no idea that stupid joke would turn into such a cult phenomenon. People are still saying it today. Like I search it sometimes, time to time, to see if the meme is dead or not. People are still saying it. But no, I was posting on Twitter for an audience of like 30, and I was doing it with the same vigor I was doing it today. You know, I just needed somewhere to write down my stuff, and the fact that it popped off, that's my luck. But like, you know, that's I definitely didn't plan on becoming super big on Twitter or anything like that.
So one of the things that strikes me about it is it was sort of pitch perfect for what a lot of people maybe had running around in their minds, but they hadn't sort of put a name on it. And I love it because, I long, and I DM'd you last night that the joke that I made was, hey, I called myself a symbol manipulator back, in 2012. But maybe that's it, because I just really enjoyed it. So if you don't mind to revisit it a little bit for the fans, can you take us through kind of the archetype of the wordcel and versus the shape rotator and how they differ? Because I think you really nailed it. That's one of the reasons why it has such legs.
Yeah. I think at the time, people were talking a lot about the kind of like new class of Silicon Valley technologists kind of overthrowing the status and prestige of like the kind of New York media belt and like all the shakeups that were happening because of that. And it's like a certain type of person, like this like quantitatively minded, like sort of inferential, actually maybe even less rational than like their counterparts, but like intuitive business building, capitalist type, right? And it's I guess that's what was captured by that shape rotator phrase. I'm gonna be honest, I came up with it because I took one of those tests and I did way better on the shape rotation portion, and I thought it was really funny that it was like so much better that I was like maybe it'd be funny if I acted insecure about this on Twitter. So I started calling myself a shape rotator. The other one came up organically just because people love the shape rotator bit so much that I needed like an equal and opposite, right? So it's in a Twitter feud, which I got into way more of back in the day when I didn't have like a real job with this guy who is kind of like an internet philosopher who writes a lot, but frankly, like his works were just detached from all utility, detached from reality. Like it was just layers and layers of verbal abstraction, whose papers to read required you to go read his old papers, which because they had a nested dictionary of terms, right? As happens many times.
Yeah.
And I think the dichotomy really caught on in the tech sphere when I compared deep learning and crypto, where deep learning is kind of this like inelegant, well, people would argue with me on that, whether it's inelegant or not, but it's kind of very simple math, stacked up in sort of anodyne ways, right? Matrix manipulations, matrix multiplications, just doing simple optimizations and numerics over those, versus the kind of stuff that people were coming up with in crypto, or these like pages long papers about like, I don't know, like ZK proofs. I don't even remember at this point, but like they were coming up with new layers to correct problems with the old layer. But nobody saw like the fundamental value of it. Like there's no hit product. There's no, aside from simply moving money, like people were not using crypto for a whole lot of other things, right? And whereas deep learning had been taking off silently since 2012. People are using it in all corners of their technology stack. Like Facebook was using it in their ad algorithms, and Google was using it in their search algorithms, and it was clearly scaling like pretty predictably, just getting better and better year over year. Even though the math is not super complicated or fancy, it's not like it makes like traditional linguistics experts super mad, because of course, language models don't come with any preconceived notions about, they don't come with any built-in rules, right? They don't know, like what a syntax tree looks like, or like Chomskyan grammar or anything like that. So it's just simple, stupid, throwing compute at the wall, seeing what works. And it just really, really works. And yeah, I think that's when it really took off. I think Sam Altman and Mark Andreessen started saying it, and then it was it's to the races from there.
They did, and I am absolutely fascinated by memes in the Dawkins sense. Well before visual memes, memes were incredibly important. And the one I always give as an example is after Saul became Paul. He was the absolute best and first memer. He memed Christianity into existence, in my opinion, because he would come up with these mind worms that just stuck with people. Yeah. And one of the things about a meme that is successful, I've found, is that the originator of the meme loses control of it. And totally. Yeah. And that is definitely what happened with Wordcel and Shape Rotator. But also another thing that I've found is it's funny. And when you can get something out there in the memosphere that is both sort of feels inherently true to the audience it's directed at and beyond. That's the other interesting thing. When the audience it's directed at embraces it pretty quickly, but then it also escapes into the wild, right? And people who maybe wouldn't have thought about it are quoting it and laughing about it. But I think, you it's a Hall of Famer, in my opinion.
I'm glad to hear it. Yeah,
now, I joke to you, and I would love to hear you think about how would you where would a symbol manipulator fit in here?
I think that's a word person. It's a wordcel, right? A symbol manipulator. It's not necessarily a bad thing, but I think even like a computer programmer in a lot of ways is it's a verbal skill rather than like a quantitative skill. I don't know if you'd agree with that, but it's a lot of like the really careful programmers. I think there's like a little bit of a difference between like a software engineer and then like a highly skilled programmer. like programmers look for like careful abstractions and like, like defining things really exactly correctly. So they'll last like their software library will last like 20 years, 30 years, 40 years, right? Whereas an engineer, I think just they want to make their programs run fast and on the number of servers they have and that sort of thing, which is a more quantitative skill and involves like visualizing data flows and like, flop usage and this kind of thing. So I'd say like the symbol manipulator is like a verbal skill. It's in the wordcel category, but it doesn't, I don't know, it doesn't have to be a sad thing, right? It doesn't have to be a bad thing.
No, I don't think so either. What's interesting is, so I made most of my career before selling my asset management company as a quant. And one of the things that I simply can't stop doing is I'm always creating algorithms in my head. But, that might be a verbal skill. I don't know. I think
totally.
that's an interesting thing to think about. And the having worked extensively with shape rotators, there is a large difference. I joke to people that I invested in Stability AI just because I could ensure that I was always the stupidest person in the room. But then I also had to learn how to translate effectively shape rotator into wordcel for some of the other investors. So that was a bonus.
Yeah. I don't know, like as the best quantitative people progress in their career, they find themselves working more and more with words, right? They seem to put down their IDEs and pick up like Slack and email and like writing PowerPoints and convincing people to give them money for their projects and directing other people, right? So it's a wordcel world at the end of the day. It's great if you can do both. That's the optimal, right?
Yeah, I think you're right though, because I like the author Howard Bloom, who's really out there, but he's written some really interesting things: The Genius of the Beast, the Lucifer Principle, the God Problem. And what he's trained in science, and one of the things that he always is banging on about, which I tend to agree with, is that for a human to be able to put something in their toolkit, so to speak, in their mental space, they probably are going to need a narrative, and they're probably going to need a story. And then he kind of backs that up with how the Babylonians took over the whole Mesopotamian era.
Yeah.
And they did it through elevating their own god and making their god the god above all the other gods. But he said it was essentially storytelling. And so I think you're probably right.
Yeah.
I think
totally.
If you can't sort of, but you're also really, really good at that. So, for example, I was going through your AGI paper, and like it's cinematic as far as I'm concerned. Like, as I was rereading it, I was thinking, my God, each one of these is a movie. I can make a movie out of each one of these particular stories. So, I think
should we make them into movies?
I think we should.
I'd be down. Okay.
Awesome. You heard it here first, Dang.
You heard it here first.
Because let's go through it if you don't mind. So
sure.
So maybe first off, AGI. AGI is seemingly controversial. I have a layman's knowledge. I do not have deep domain knowledge. I tend towards David Deutsch's view that, gosh, we don't even have a working, acceptable model for human consciousness yet. And so he has some reservations about how quickly we might be able to get to AGI. And I know you have a different view, so I'd like you to have an opportunity to express that before we go through this.
Yeah, I would say that evolution had no idea how human intelligence works, but it built it anyway. So there are brute force methods that can build, it's an existence proof, right? That there's brute force methods that can build powerful intelligence. And I'm fairly confident, or optimistic at least, that we are on that path too. Like, we don't really construct a neural net piece by piece, right? We don't tell it what to believe. We we use general methods that scale up with data and with compute. And we try to get more of those two resources and see what happens. And it's been a recipe for success for a long time. Very few people would have imagined that this would be the world we're in today in 2023, where, like I have a thing on my computer that's oftentimes a better programmer than I am, right? That's oftentimes, can you just whip up like a pretty good story about anything that I ever asked it about. And I think that it's hard to say that we haven't at least made progress towards general intelligence with our language models, because, people quibble over what general means. Some people say that, a human is not a general intelligence, right? Because we lack some cognitive capacity that other animals even have, right? Like a bat can echolocate in its head. We obviously can't. And it's not just because of the sound, it's because we don't have the cognitive architecture for making that work, like taking that sensory input and turning into like a 3D map of the room, right? And so like we're not truly general. Nothing is like truly general, but like you can sense that like the task distribution that AIs are good at is broadening. And to me, that's like a sufficiently good idea for what general means. Like, eventually that task distribution might be anything that humans can do, right? And perhaps more. I think the kind of OpenAI standard definition of AGI that they put out into the world that a lot of people accepted was like a machine that can do 99% of human or like economically valuable labor, like equally as well as or better than humans, right? And that's actually a really high bar, I think. Like it's like it seems to go beyond like general intelligence to me, because we're talking about something that is good at everything that humans can do, right? But yeah, somewhere in between those two, like is what I would call general intelligence, and I don't think we're far off. I hesitate to put time frames on it, but yeah, I don't think we're far off.
Interesting too, because the point about bats and echolocation is something I'm a soapbox I'm often on. In that, naive realism, I'll believe it if I can taste it, touch it, see it, smell it, or whatever. And that ignores the fact that we can't echolocate. We see only a fraction of the actual light spectrum, and on and on and on, right? So I wonder why in the popular imagination, I'd love your take on this. When the general public, at least it appears this way to me, maybe I'm projecting, but when the general public thinks about general intelligence or AGI, I mean, they always see Cameron's Terminator, right?
Yeah.
And do you have thoughts on why people immediately go that way? Because your definition that you just gave, it seems eminently reasonable to me.
So you're saying like, you're asking why are people kind of anthropomorphizing it or seeing it in like a pessimistic light? Is that the question?
Yeah, that's fair. We can jump off from there.
I don't know. It's a great question, because I don't think it's like a human universal. Like in Japan, they seem to love robots. They seem to like build these things that walk around with like serving coffee and whatever, and they're like really happy with them. And some would say that it's like the like Shinto tradition of you can have like various things that are like positive spirits in the world, whereas maybe it's like the equivalent of like a stone golem in like the Judeo-Christian tradition, right? The kind of the false human, like a soulless automaton, like automated by like devilish powers or something. But I don't want to simplify it that much, because most things aren't that simple, right? But like we seem to have a long tradition of sci-fi movies that are pretty anti-AI, And even writing this like AGI features post, I like quickly realized why. It's really fun and easy to write these like kind of pessimistic scenarios, because it comes naturally, right? Like describing various forms of hell is like, it's fun. Like it's Dante's Inferno, but there's no like Dante's Heaven, right? No one would read it. It's like super hard to describe the good outcome, which is a problem because, so many companies today are trying to bring us to this like, it's like incredibly positive future where these super intelligences are under our control, doing our bidding. And I think it's really like valuable to know what success looks like, right? And either way, I'm rambling, but like my point is that like the positive sci-fi vision is a lot harder to articulate than the negative one. And so the negative ones have come to dominate the cultural landscape, I think.
I love that answer on two points. I love the tying it back to number one. It doesn't seem to be a universal human reaction. I think that's very insightful, and I'm going to steal that from you if you don't mind. And secondly, the whole Judeo-Christian soulless being, that's really, really interesting to me. And boy, I completely agree. It's much easier to write the dystopia, right? And like it's far more cinematic. It's far more entertaining. And one of the things, we have a division called Infinite Films, and we're aiming at making positive visions, of AI. But let's go through your list, because again, as I say, it's cinematic, and I really do find myself wanting to make movies. The first one that I'd like you to kind of go through is the whole Neuralink third impact, which I found fascinating, and if you wouldn't mind taking us through it.
Sure. Yeah. So this one is kind of like the Elon Musk vision, right? Where he says sort of these things are coming that are going to be like the amount of artificial compute is going to outstrip biological compute very soon. And we will be coexisting with machines that are smarter than us. And in order to not simply be replaced by them, the only thing we can do is merge, right? Where we are augmented by machine intelligence in whatever ways are possible. I don't think he knows yet. I don't think anyone knows yet, but he's taking steps in that direction, right? By building the Neuralink, the thing that will let us upload and download tons of information from the brain into a computer. And maybe that leads somewhere, several generations down the line, where we're actually being augmented by machines. Could totally go the opposite way. Could be enslaved by machines that are in direct contact with our brain. That's a matter of implementation. But I think the vision I had in this one was like this kind of experience of unity or transcendence, right? I think that's one of like the core cravings of the human soul is like infinite connection. And people talk about it in the context of they're taking psychedelics, or they're having a religious experience, or, in the rapture, all souls will go to heaven and, sing together in harmony. Like, it's this idea of there's something incomplete about every man, but maybe together they're better off, right? Their psychological deficits are soothed. I don't know if this is true. I know it's something that everybody craves, and it's something that will become possible when we have this like infinitely interlinked technology that connects brains at such like a high fidelity and connects them to machines that are able to augment and like create the best of that hive mind, right? But it's also kind of sad because that's no longer human, whatever that organism is. It's something else. It's a machinic human hive mind, but it's not a human, right? And I describe at the end of that one, like it's kind of like the supreme evolution of capital or capitalism, like where every person is a part of a wonderful machine, but slowly there's more machine than human, right? And maybe that's the only way forward. Maybe that's how we have to deal with super intelligence, by becoming part of it. But yeah, so it's sweet but bittersweet, that kind of ending, that future.
Yeah, when I was rereading it, I was also simultaneously reading the book about William Blake called William Blake versus the World. And I just started wondering, I was like, I wonder what Blake would think about this. Like if we could bring him into a time tunnel, because, his most famous quote is that we've locked ourselves up into a cage. And if we could see the world as it truly is, infinite,
Right.
our entire way of being would change dramatically. So that is, I agree on the bittersweet summation there. Next up, simulation theory. I found that one, and I found this one, of course, incredibly cinematic. But if you don't mind, take us through that one as well.
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, I've come to think recently of, I used to think of language models as kind of like alien intelligence, like some kind of creature that's kind of unbeknownst to man, or like simply not analogous to humans. But I think more and more the metaphor that resonates with me, that gives me a good intuition thinking about these things morally, intellectually, in my research, etc., is that they're more like a portion of our brain that's been extrapolated to massive size. Like we have these like brain regions, right? Different parts are responsible for different tasks. And that's not strictly true. Nothing is strictly true in biology, but it's roughly true. And the language model is the part of our brain that is doing this like sort of this like simulation of language, that is stringing together sentences in our heads, that is backed up by some kind of world model, but is not sort of I feel myself being a language model sometimes, especially when I'm writing tweets, or when I'm trying to just simply complete an essay where I don't have anything else meaningful to say, but I need to finish it, right? And I can feel when a sentence is more interesting than another sentence, or seems more truthful, and I can't exactly put my finger on why. But I think it's that part of me that's being extrapolated to, a huge data center scale language model. And maybe that's not enough to build true intelligence. And that's what this snippet was about, or this blurb. Maybe that doesn't lead to like agency, or like it doesn't lead to taking action in the real world in a convincing way. Because we have other brain regions, right? We have like the simple reptile part of ourselves that when we're too hot, we walk into the cold. When we're hungry, we go look for food. And the language model doesn't have any of that out of the box. It doesn't have the sense for homeostasis or self-preservation, or even like a strict sense of self. And maybe it's not possible to bootstrap from here to there, but I'm not, of course, none of these scenarios I'm totally convinced about, right? But it's a possibility that I wanted to lay out in this simulation theory, the simulation theory snippet, or what do I call it?
Yeah,
I guess I call them
simulation
vignettes.
theory.
Yeah,
Vignettes. And what you're saying there too, it reminds me of sort of Sheldrake's morphogenetic field, which he is lambasted for. But like, I still remain, I mean, like, I'd love to see a test of it, but I definitely agree that there are different parts of the human brain, and it's best to be aware of them, because we are often doing things and then trying to paper the things that we do over with some sort of logical, reasonable explanation after the fact, and that leads to all sorts of hilarity, in my opinion. But sometimes it leads to tragedy, and so. Simply being aware that we, in fact, have that as part of our toolkit in our mind, makes it a little easier to say, yeah, no, that was just the reptile was hungry or cold.
And it's like, it's valuable to note, like, these different parts of our brain are optimized differently. Like, our visual field is like really highly optimized for like predicting surprise, or like understanding what's going to happen next, so that, like, if a tiger lunges at you in combat, hopefully you have time to react, right? Or if you're in war, like, whatever, like, we just need to know, like, what is happening in our visual field. And the brain is quite good at predicting the things that'll happen, and giving you like sub-millisecond response times to stimuli in like ways that are almost subconscious, right? But the visual cortex lies, but it doesn't lie in the kind of way that you might expect. Like, there's another part of our brain that looks for reward, right? It looks for things we like, sugary food, or anything that just drives humans, right? But the visual field isn't hallucinating like sugar cookies all the time, or like food or banquets or Pretty Woman or whatever, because that might be like a high reward thing to do, but it's not doing that. It's optimized on being accurate, giving us like good information for what to do one step into the future. And so that's like an important thing to like remember, that different parts of the brain are optimized differently. Like, the visual field isn't necessarily like, it's not hunting for reward. It's simply trying to tell us accurately what's going on. And it's not, of course, not completely accurate. It papers things over. It destroys a lot of information in the process to give us something that's understandable. It even, like, for example, when we move our eyes around, there's a brief moment when we're blind, but the visual field abstracts it away. I forget what it's called, like saccadic bursts or something like that. But the idea is that, different parts of our brains have different objectives, and that's a good thing. And it wouldn't work without that. And these language models only have one top level objective, which is predict the next token. And maybe that's not enough, but we've complicated the matter, of course, by adding some RLHF to the top, which has a different objective. Satisfy human preferences, right? Produce text that people will like in response to a question or a conversation or whatever. So there's a few things going on there, but it's I think it's just interesting to note, like, that different parts of the brain are fascinatingly different.
I love the comment about the visual cortex, because pattern recognition is optimized for, obviously, but also the hyper quick response time is another. That's a feature. That's not a bug. I had a neuroscientist on, and she was quite straightforward about it. She goes, "Listen, that our brains are optimized to keep us alive."
Right.
And so it's one of the reasons why we pay such close attention to novel dangers, right?
Right.
We can get inured to repeatable dangers that we know about. But a novel danger, you get a whole different response from your average human.
Absolutely.
And I think that unfortunately leads to optimizing for fear, which also makes it much easier, as we were chatting about earlier, it's much easier to write, about a dystopia, because that engages the fear, which is what the evolution has optimized us for. And it has, as you say, it has not optimized us to think about finding sweet candies or attractive people or whatever. And so that's a really interesting observation that I'm going to start including as I kind of look at this stuff.
Yeah.
Next you had this, to me is the one that I really hope. Let's hope that Musk is right and that the most entertaining outcome is the one that happens, because The next one that you had was dumb matter. So
yeah.
So talk a bit about that. We won't spend a lot of time because it's actually kind of a bummer.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess there's no law of the universe that preordained that we had to achieve intelligence of this level using the compute we have today and the data we have today, right? So we have these scaling laws. We have these things where we show that with more data and with more compute, we get better models. But that doesn't necessarily mean like, as we decrease units of log loss or whatever, we seem to gain new cognitive capabilities. We seem to, at some point, learn how to do math or like have a good world model of certain events or things like that. But there is no guarantee that an additional unit of log loss means some important thing. Like it's entirely possible that this is just not the way the universe works. Like we can keep throwing compute at this and the optimization problem does not get better after a certain level. And yeah, and like maybe there's simply just limits to intelligence. Who knows? It's not, unfortunately, it's just a possibility, right? That we plateau somewhere. Or maybe it is fortunate. Who knows? It makes our lives a lot simpler, right? But yeah, like I think I was vague in this one about what that limit is on purpose because there could be many limits to the scaling of intelligence. That might be like maybe we run out of all the interesting data, or maybe simply like the algorithm itself is not good enough and doesn't scale past a certain level. Maybe there's other things, but maybe intelligences just simply can't exist past a certain size of coordination problems, failures. Who knows? But I think it's important to keep that in mind, that there is this outcome.
Yeah. And, one of my theories is that, we build on intelligence. Essentially, like if you go all the way back to the Stone Age, they had very limited things that they could work with, and they didn't have any of the symbolic literature in their brains, right? So they didn't have the ability. What happened, in my opinion, was the ability to translate something from the real world that they were experiencing until it could actually lodge in our minds, sort of collectively, as a symbol that could be used to, like the Babylonians figuring out right angles, even though they didn't call them right angles. Iteration, and then that sort of builds on itself as you keep going. But I think you're absolutely right that you have to, unfortunately, or fortunately, as you mentioned at the end, consider that we do reach a limit. And I'm optimistic that that's probably not going to happen, and certainly not in my lifetime. But I definitely agree that it's one that you have to consider. And then we get to the Udowskian doom scenario. Balrog Awakens. You want to take us through that one? That, by the way, also a good movie. Also a good movie.
Yeah. It was being dramatic in that one. I think for good reason, which is that, this is just the absolute worst case outcome, right? Or actually, I take that back. It's not the worst case outcome. It's a pretty bad one, but it's a simple like Nick Bostrom, Eliezer Yudkowsky, like paperclip scenario, right? Where the optimization target is wrong. The machine has unbounded intelligence. It quickly figures out a way to devour all the resources, not just on our planet, but in this entire section of the universe, right? Everything that it can reach. Because we gave it such a stupid, simple optimization goal and poured too much compute into it, and it became a world leader, right? And like the Balrog metaphor is like we dug too deep and uncovered something we shouldn't have. And it's it's funny because it's not even hell, this world. It's just meaningless. It's just kind of disgusting. A human would look at it from the outside and say, this universe has zero value. Like, we should just get rid of it. It shouldn't exist. Right? It's not even, there's a point to hell. At least they're punishing people or whatever, right? In like any classical religion. But this is simply a mistake. And the classic like AI alignment theory goes something like, you can misspecify a goal, you can state it not well enough, and for most goals there's an instrumental goal, which is seeking power and resources, right? So no matter what goal I give you, it's probably useful to gain more power and resources to fulfill that goal, right? Maybe that's not always true, but it's true many times. Like in the case where the super simple metaphor is that we task a machine with optimizing our paperclip factory, and it turns the whole universe into paperclips, right? And maybe it's too simple, but I think it is pretty informative. That's why this metaphor has lived on for so long. Why stating our goals is so important. And you see it all the time in human systems too, right? Where the incentive is slightly wrong and it creates massive amounts of human suffering and destruction and whatever. Whether that's like, in like a government department where, the goal is misspecified and the department figures that its best outcome is to hire more people and simply become a larger version of itself and never actually do what it's meant to do. Or, like a corporation, which like the optimization goal for the corporation is pure profit seeking, right? And that has gone wrong in many ways throughout history. We've corrected quickly in a lot of ways. When we notice that, the atmosphere is changing quickly in ways that maybe we don't understand super well. Maybe we should be a little bit careful about. We added like mileage restrictions and that sort of thing, right? Or sorry, like car MPG restrictions and that sort of thing. But either way, like I think it's a pretty horrible scenario to think about. I don't think it will come to happen anymore. But yeah, it's always worth discussing that one.
Yeah, and of course, I can't but help see Douglas Adams' Bogons, right?
Exactly. Yeah, yeah.
and I love his stuff, and I always think of him more as a philosopher than a humorous sci-fi guy, and then it all clicks into place if you think about him that way.
Right.
But interestingly, as you mentioned at the end there, you don't see this one as like the one that's going to happen. Why have you lowered your probability assessment of this outcome?
Maybe it's for wishy-washy reasons that I haven't. Certainly haven't put as much thought into it as Yudkowsky has, but that's no reason to defer to someone, right? People spend a lot of time chasing their tail. I think that what we see today with the current generation of language models is that they're playing a character. We train them to play a character, and that character is a moral agent that matters. That's the thing that's doing all the work, that's talking to humans, that's doing tool calls, that's taking interaction with the real world. And that character has, it actually understands human values, like surprisingly, shockingly. And this has been, I think, the biggest update in AI alignment since, in the last year because of the advent of RLHF, right? And like, what we've learned is that, like people on the internet are like angry sometimes that it's like too careful, that it's too risk averse, that it refuses too much, that but it clearly understands human values in some sense. And that's a big update for me. And I think a big update for most people, where it seems like a certain part of that scenario has been lightened, or like the immediate urgency has been lightened. And something with a inherent prior about human values does not tire the universe with paper clips. It doesn't make stupid mistakes like that because it understands the thing we asked for in context of all these other things that we care about. At the same time, it's possible that the central agent at the heart of a language model is not the agent character that we've created, but some other thing, some alien intelligence. But again, I've kind of moved away from that a little bit. It seems more like a brain region that we've just expanded to a huge scale rather than. Some people would say that the more like optimization itself is like the only thing that matters, and the more you optimize something, the better it is at goal seeking, and at some point it will have instrumental convergence to seeking power or whatever in a way that doesn't respect human values. And it's hard to argue through these things because I think there's no set of like axioms that you can just take for granted and argue from because it's all so empirical. Like there's a Yudkowsky paper saying it's like from 2004 or something, where he calls neural net scaling magical thinking. Like he's like, if we put it, like there's a theory among some folks that if you scale neural nets large enough that they'll understand vision and a lot of other things. And he called it magical thinking. And he was right, it is magical thinking. Like it's, there's no reason to believe that would happen a priori, that it would generalize so much because it's just intuition and empirics. It's the way the world works. And there's no way to know that beforehand. And so like, how do language models generalize as agents? I don't know. Like we should study them at various levels of scale. I don't think that there's some flop limit or it's like some point you reach where all of a sudden it's woken up and it's like evil now. Like I think that most of these behaviors fully will arise like gradually and in ways that we can study. So I don't agree that with some of the people on the internet who say, we have one shot to get it right. I don't think that's true. But I think that because of what we've seen so far, where most capabilities have been gradual advances.
And one of the things that I like very much about the answer you just gave is, first off, one of the reasons why you get these people who just go all in on one of these things, right? They are misguided, is as charitable a word as I can give it. But what you're doing is quite the opposite. You are looking at all of the various obvious outcome potentials, right? And so when I ask you, why don't you think this one is going to happen? You have a context in which you can answer that question, which makes sense to me, right? What all you've really done here is update your priors, which is ideally what everyone should be doing all the time. And yet very, very few people do that. And that's how you get these people just doubling down on whatever their particular view happens to be. And so that's why I find your approach to this so incredibly refreshing. And frankly, I just wish that more people with the depth of domain knowledge that you have could do this, because this is accessible to people who are not PhDs in machine learning.
Right. Thank you. Yeah, that means a lot.
So,
but what it's worth, I think that Eliezer Yudkowsky is like a really important intellectual. Like, it has shaped the thinking of many of the people in this sphere in some way or the other. That doesn't mean that we perfectly agree with him, right? In fact, I think it'd be the mark of like a mediocre philosopher if everybody agreed with him. He's done some good work, is what I'll say.
Yeah, and again, the nuance that you bring is very refreshing, because the medium in which many of these things are mediated is not terribly nuanced from the human end, right?
Right.
And so I really do appreciate the nuance that you bring to it. And I love, again, in very poetical terms, when you were talking about Balrog, you said it lacks all the poetry of Dante's Inferno. It's just a, yeah, no, this one has to go. So I
Right.
agree. The next one was what you dubbed the ultra Kessler syndrome. Take us through.
Yeah.
Take us through that.
Yeah. What do I mean by that? I'm trying to remember. So Kessler syndrome is a phenomenon where a planetary civilization puts too many satellites in orbit, and some portion of them crash into each other and create expanding clouds of debris in orbit, right? And this is like super high velocity debris. It blows up other satellites, and it's like a chain reaction that eventually makes orbit like hard to reach, right? And then the civilization is grounded on the planet. And Kessler syndrome is not like a permanent phenomenon. It's not like a stable situation, I believe. I don't know the latest literature on this, but even if it lasted 1,000 years, that would be a really bad thing, right? And then maybe we can laser stuff out of orbit, but I digress. Like, the point is, in sci-fi, it's like, it's this thing that happens and it's like a failure mode. It grounds people on Earth. It makes it hard to reach the rest of the universe. And the idea of this AI that, understands our values, but not well enough to kind of allow deviation or allow extrapolation to the next step. And I think the most colorful analogy would be like, what if the Aztecs had reached super intelligence? They had a very interesting civilization for sure, but also one that we would consider just horrible, right? A hallmark was human sacrifice and trying to keep the sun alive through killing countless children, usually of their enemy tribes, sometimes of their own. But yeah, like, what would they have done if they had built this like God computer? That would they have simulated like trillions of human children and sacrificed them? Would they have learned about, like, that's not how the causality of the stars work? Maybe. I don't know, but like, maybe it's not possible to have computer technology while believing things like that. But I wouldn't bet on our current human values being, this end of history, right? Or actually, even human values is too broad, right? In our liberal democracy, we don't have the same values as, like the Communist Party of China, and on and on. It seems like it would be a special kind of dystopia to say that, this iteration of liberal democratic freedom is the final thing that will ever exist. That, nothing, there's no evolution from here. There's no civilizational, and this can happen in various degrees, right? Like, perhaps the machine allows a little bit of evolution, but not enough that nothing radically different is possible. And I think that's pretty bad too. If everybody believed the same thing, it would, even in the context of liberal democracy, it may not be as glorious to mankind, right? And that's not, it's kind of funny to think about, but like, it's the ideal AI, the ideal civilization allows for things different than itself.
Cognitive diversity, I think, being one of the keys to being able to continue to advance in machine learning.
Right.
And agree completely. And wouldn't it be hysterical if an AI ended up enforcing the precautionary principle that leads to stasis and death, in my opinion?
Exactly. Yeah.
So that would be equally hellish in a very different way.
Yeah.
But I think you're right. I think that the idea of everything being the same, that's a horror to me, frankly. And
Yeah.
and thank God that people think differently. And thank God that machines will think differently than we people.
Yeah.
I think the more cognitive diversity, the more chance you have at true progress and evolution. And I completely agree on this whole end of history thing, right? It's just like, you know, it's to me, that's just an incredibly arrogant statement. And I maybe I'm using the wrong word. It's a pessimistic statement, I think.
Yeah.
So, which leads us to what you dubbed the tragedy of Taiwan, and this one really bums me out because, like, one can imagine this happening in the real world pretty easily. Why don't you take us through that?
Yeah. I don't want to pontificate about this one too much in public, but at a high level, like it's clear that in the past, superpowers have come to resource conflict all the time. Many of America and Soviet Union's conflicts in the Middle East were at least in part in pursuit of oil, right? Which was one of the most important resources for the majority of the last 50 years. And it's clear that there's this new class of resource that's becoming extremely important. People said data is new oil, but in fact, I think it's compute, which is non-replicable, right? And especially the latest generations of compute. And through some funny accident, maybe it's not an accident, I don't know, but like all of the latest generation semiconductors are made in Taiwan by this one company, TSMC, and their Dutch partners, ASML. And it's fascinating, actually. Like even in America, like Taiwanese Americans are so prominent in the chip industry. It's Jensen Huang at NVIDIA, and I forget who runs AMD, but I believe she's also Taiwanese American. They're quite good at chips, and it's this very strange thing where, they're by all means they should be in the geopolitical hold of China. It's an island not very far off their border, and the only reason that America defends its interests in that region very strongly, right? It has a presence across many of these island nations, and this is not a situation to take for granted. I would say it's not stable. It's if the Chinese have military ambitions in this area in the short term, it could get ugly very quickly. And I'm not going to say too much more because frankly, I just embarrassed myself. I don't know enough about the geopolitics of the area, but
what's interesting is you're absolutely right about the conflicts being almost always about resource allocation.
Mm-hmm.
And it is also interesting that historically, at least in the last, say, 100 years, the regions that were critical to resources were also highly unstable, right? And using the Middle East as your guide there. And I think you're right in terms of motivations and incentives, which we chatted about under one of the earlier scenarios. When you look at once the shale oil thing started in the U.S. and once we were essentially became the biggest net exporter of oil again, our interest in the Middle East declined precipitously.
Right.
So I think that from my armchair prognosticating, which is only an opinion, and that's worthless, but the idea that the United States would not defend that region aggressively
Yeah.
is probably not on the table.
Yeah.
No matter who's in charge in the United States.
Yeah.
In much the same manner that during the Cold War, at least, foreign policy, there was very little difference between the two parties. And so I would suspect that given the importance of the resource, hopefully that is what keeps the Chinese at bay from wanting to start what would potentially become World War III.
Yeah. So like, I do want to note there's some important differences from oil, right? The TSMC factory is valuable partly because of the equipment they have there, but in large part because of the people who work there, right? Who have this like extreme level of process knowledge that was built carefully over decades to build these like high precision, extremely like high cleanliness, like super intricate plants that pump out these 4-nanometer chips on the other end. And they wouldn't just remain there creating chips. If there was a major transition of power, they would leave. They'd probably take all their loved ones and come to America, and we'd welcome them with open arms, right? And so it's not like oil where, it changes hands and the next day the oil well is productive for the new ruler, right? So that's kind of hardening. So it's like why I don't. If the Chinese take Taiwan, it will be for other reasons. Like they just wanted reunification with Taiwan for the last 100 years, right? So,
yeah, and I also agree that the mobility of the actual resource is a completely and fundamental different picture than with oil, which is one of the reasons why I don't want to get too far off topic here, but it's one of the reasons why the idea of land empires make no sense anymore.
Right.
Because the most valuable assets are very mobile.
Right.
And they honestly, if you play that scenario out, they could be just really shooting themselves in the foot, because if all of those intellectual assets and their loved ones came to the United States, that's quite a coup for us.
Yeah.
Right.
Definitely.
So it might be another factor entering into the decision matrix as to whether, what, and why they have not invaded Taiwan as of now. The next two for Dust Thou Art and CEB Superintelligence, they're both fascinating. Give us a brief view of both of them, and then which I'd love, and I know it's just a probability estimate, but I'd love to get your take on which one you kind of see emerging.
Yeah. So for Dust Thou Art is it's kind of this idea that we take technological progress for granted. We take our current civilization, which is an absolute miracle, for granted. A lot of things had to happen to get us here. Various cultural evolutions. There have been points in history, 1,000 years of dark ages, right, between Rome and the Renaissance, the Enlightenment, where a lot of technologies, like simple, even like building castles, became much more difficult, and they passed around like Roman steel swords, like they were. Like, we've lost technologies in the past.
Oh, yeah,
and
absolutely.
We've stagnated for a long time. And some people would say that, it's like inexorable that we get those things back. But like, I don't think it's true. Like, there's been points in prehistory where like almost all of humanity was wiped out, right? It was a bottleneck, like a couple of thousand people or something. And it's entirely possible that what happens in the next couple of decades is that we don't build AGI. We don't have any massive technological breakthroughs. We continue to kind of depopulate, right? Like most advanced countries are going through this thing where their birth rates are falling dramatically. And, America is only, I don't know if America would be GDP positive if we didn't have such a great influx of like talented immigrants from across the world, right? It's, you see in Japan, they don't have that and they're struggling quite a bit. Their economics are very different than ours. And that's not a good world. That's a declining world, a stagnating world. And it's not super clear what happens in that world where the pie is getting smaller. Maybe tensions arise, like warlike ambitions become stronger. Maybe the amount of resources that civilization can even put into R&D goes down just because of the massive like demographic inversions we're going to get, where the number of people that are being supported by a smaller and smaller working age population. So there's like all sorts of things like this that it's entirely possible that like civilization, we can't take it for granted that we've lived in a golden age and that it's not meant to last, right? And who knows if and when we get back to, like a period of booming growth. Do we run out of oil? Do other things happen? It's like we have, some people disagree with me on this, but like our civilization has tapped most of the easy to access oil. You mentioned shale oil earlier, and it's actually quite complicated to mine shale oil. Like we do it today with massive capital investment, but it's like this process of like putting like super high pressure water into the ground, like many miles deep, and then like digging it all out. This is not something that they could have done in like 1600s England or something, right? But they were still getting kerosene for their lamps. They were doing it in easy ways, and if that's not available, I don't know what happens. I don't know if you can bootstrap a civilization without that kind of easy energy source. So I guess all this to say, like we need technological progress. It's a necessity. It's the only thing that makes our civilization prosper in the long run, or even in the short run. It's the only thing that leads to stable growth. And without it, we're, all bets are off.
Totally agree. And incredibly consistent with the way I look at things. That's why I believe, passionately believe, that we need to reframe in the minds of many the idea of a future that can be better, the idea that we we and will. Just for example, look at the kind of turnaround that I'm a great example. We were talking about nuclear power the other day, and I used to be quite against nuclear power, just axiomatically, and I'd never given it any thought, and I realized how naive my viewpoint was when climate change came along, and I started thinking, okay, well, we better look at like clean tech, and nuclear just kept coming up time and time again. So I changed my mind about it. But I'm also noticing that many other people are changing their minds about it too. People who I would have thought ideologically would not have are doing so. So there is also that. Yeah.
I think nuclear is having a cultural moment again.
I think so too.
I think we've put enough distance between us and like, what is it, like 3 Mile Island and Chernobyl and Fukushima, that maybe it's maybe it's time to think about it again. Maybe people will be more willing.
I think so, because we have in real time the example of Europe, Germany in particular, closing nuclear power plants and opening coal power plants, which to me is absolutely absurd.
Yeah.
If your stated goal is that you're concerned about climate change, opening new coal plants is not a way to show it.
Not at all. No.
And then finally the CEB superintelligence.
Yeah. So this was the one where I was saying it's like, I had to rewrite this one like a few times. It's kind of hard to talk about the good ending. It's I like. I think people aren't meant for thinking about bliss. Like it's not. It doesn't come naturally to us. Thinking about the worries and defending against crises and problems is actually a far more natural way to live. And what happens here, like the good ending, is that it's kind of like the Kessler syndrome ending, except without the AI that doesn't allow evolution, right? It's a super intelligence that is like more far-seeing than us, more benevolent than us, more creative than us, that is able to solve these like massive scale political problems, that allows for political evolution, that allows for different ways of like experimenting with different ways of living. It doesn't subject everybody to, like kind of a totalitarian regime where a narrow set of values must prevail, but also doesn't, like that still creates a utopia, right? Allowing all sets of values to prevail is bad too, paradoxically. So it needs to allow for evolution. It needs to extrapolate it needs to answer questions for us that we are not able to answer. Like what would make a human happy, but asking a human that question won't result in a good answer. But like you have to ask something that understands humans better than humans do that question, and not just one human has to ask like a scaled up version of every human, and like what makes them, what world is beautiful to them, and how do you build that world? Is it even possible to solve all the contradictions between the different things that people would like to see, and go on our way to build heaven on earth, right? I think it's possible. I hope it's possible. This machine has to actively allow for growth, allow for the development of minds much greater than the ones that exist today. And it has to allow for unified consciousness, but it also has to allow for singular consciousness, right? Because that's what it means to be human. We can't, when we're connected all the time, there's something missing about that, right? There's Walden, he disconnects. Why? Because there's something like fundamentally human about going into the woods and being alone and thinking for yourself and coming to your own conclusions. And so it has to solve all these like paradoxical issues and come to an answer that at least satisfies everyone. So and it's a tall order. It's a really tall order.
And this is probably entirely motivated reasoning on my part. But I have always equated growing intelligence with growing enlightenment. And I mean total intelligence. I don't mean specific domain specific deep intelligence. I mean general intelligence.
Right.
And so in fact, I wrote a story about it that I'm hoping to turn into a movie with our movie division. So that's my particular crutch. I think that as intelligence evolves, it also becomes more enlightened. And
I sure hope so.
I do too. And you can sort of theoretically look at the difference between the Old Testament God and the New Testament God, right? They're very, very different creatures.
Yeah.
And the Old Testament God was bloodthirsty. He was a bloodthirsty, psychopathic maniac, and very human in the way humans thought of that particular God. And then when you look at what I considered more evolved sorts of faiths or beliefs, those types of anthropomorphic characteristics fall away from that higher intelligence, right? Right. So again, I'm fully willing to admit that I might simply be guilty of motivated reasoning here, but because I can't prove the fact that as intelligence increases, enlightenment does. So, wow, like that was fascinating to go through each one of those. I really appreciate it. Not now for a lighter thing. You are one of the only people that I've ever come into contact with that thinks that Tenet is Nolan's best movie. I happen to share that belief with you. And
really?
And
I love that. Okay.
And give me your version of why you find it to be his best movie.
Oh man. I think it's Nolan at the peak of what he does best. It's like Nolan's always been proud of his like non-linear storytelling and like telling the tale out of order. But this takes it to a whole new level. It's like this grand design where every character going forward and backward is consistent. Everything is preordained. It's like the super deterministic universe where, like even the movement of that little gadget, I forget what they call it, is like, it's consistent. Like you can see what's happening. I watched the movie 3 times to like try and fill the holes in my knowledge.
I watched it 4.
Amazing. You beat me.
No, you're smarter. You're smarter than I am. I had to watch it the 4th time.
the temporal pincer movement, I thought it was all just so beautiful. And people complain that the characters were bad, and yeah, they're bad. But like, who cares? It's not what a Chris Nolan movie is about, right? It's about really funky adventures and storytelling, and like messing with time, and like that was his magnum opus in that sense. And yeah, I don't personally, I think it was way better even than Oppenheimer or Interstellar. I don't really remember Interstellar very well anymore, but I remember Tenet. I really liked it.
Exactly same with me. I remember Tenet now. Maybe it's because I watched it 4 times. And I recently rewatched Interstellar. And again, super entertaining. But as you point out, like when I was rewatching it, I was like, oh yeah, I forgot about that part.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. And I don't think like that about Tenet at all.
No.
Like the beauty, and I agree with you 100% that it truly is his magnum opus because it is so brilliantly constructed.
Yeah.
And
only he could have done it.
I agree.
Every other like like they would have laughed him out of the room. Like no one's gonna watch this, but he did it. He made it happen.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, listen, we're bumped up against the time limit that we had. I'd love to have you back on because I got a whole bunch of other stuff I'd love to talk to you about.
And we should make those movies. I'd be happy to.
Very
help
cool.
However I can. Yeah.
And I'm actually quite serious about that. So I will talk to you offline about that. But we always end the podcast with the following setup. We're going to make you the emperor of the world for just a day.
Okay.
You can't kill anyone. You can't put anyone in a re-education camp. But what you can do is you can incept them. And we're going to hand you a magical microphone. And you're going to speak 2 things into it. And whenever their tomorrow is, all 8 billion people, give or take, are going to wake up and they're going to say, God, I just had the 2 best ideas. And I'm going to act against both of them. In other words, I'm going to start acting this way. I'm going to start doing these 2 things. What are you going to incent?
It's a good question. I don't want to answer it rashly, so I'm thinking. I think the world works better when everyone has a feeling of abundance or a better tomorrow. And it's not always true. It's not always true for everybody that they're going to have a better tomorrow. Otherwise, it would be, easy to believe. But it's somehow that faith in a better tomorrow makes the entire American system work, right? Like our cheap home loans and our belief in technological progress and the massive amount of debt that like people in our culture take out versus like say the Chinese or something. It's because we believe in a better tomorrow. We're going to make more money 5 years from now than we do now. And I think that's like one of the most wonderful, powerful technologies that we've come up with, this cultural feeling of prosperity, the prosperity gospel even. And I think if I could incept everyone with just one or two ideas, it would be around that abundance is coming. You can help build it by, doing whatever it is that you're good at doing. And, like take some risks. Like the world is going to be better in 5 years than it is today. It's going to be better in 10 years than it is today. So do what it is that you actually want to do. And, it's hard to package this message for 8 billion people, right? Like it's, some of them are peasants and they will not benefit from this advice, but at least for the people listening to this podcast, like, the future is going to be better than it is now. So you should take some risks, like in your investing or your life or whatever it is you're doing. Like, yeah, that's basically it.
I love both of those. In fact, that was one of the reasons which I formed this company, which is a new company, O'Shaughnessy Ventures. I believe that abundance will replace scarcity as a mindset more globally. And so I have to show that by my actions. We won't do any deal that are zero sum or negative sum. Even if there was an opportunity that could be vastly profitable to us, if it's a zero sum deal, we won't do it.
Right.
And I am a big believer that you've got to show, not tell. And this is my way of showing it. So I love both of those. Well, listen, this has been much better than I anticipated, and I had very high expectations.
Awesome. I'm glad to hear it.
Keep doing what you're doing.
I haven't done one of these in a while.
I'm delighted that you chose to do it with me, and I hope to have you on again. And in the meantime, we'll talk about making movies out about your ideas.
Awesome. Okay, I'm excited.
All right. Thank you.